some of the pieces that you have?
Yes, which I realized I didn't hit record. So just for recording's sake, here at the Rochester Museum and Science Center, we did receive 3 copies of Getting a Feel for Eclipses, the tactile map for explaining the eclipse, where you can feel the path. This was produced by NASA. We have 3 copies of that and a bunch of other copies of all of their other space tactile books.
Fantastic. I had mentioned to Dan that it would be wonderful to work with Brockport and potentially see if Camp Abilities, for instance, might be looking to plan something for the eclipse itself where we could use those materials. So looking forward to developing a few more of those relationships. As we jump in, I really want to focus on picking up where we left off at the last meeting. I think that we had done some really nice group work around what could this impact be, not even just with this event, but obviously the greater good of the community around this narrative of inclusion. So I was very excited by that. I know that I have a conversation coming up with the ARC on some of the things that they're looking at. I wonder though, if we want to start with, I think we can do a quick introduction of each other. If you'll give your name and what organization you're looking at or working with, and if you're looking at a specific event already in the community. So at least get those couple of things. I'll just start from my viewpoint here of starting with Caitlin.
Hello, sorry, I am driving, so I apologize for not being on camera. But I'm Caitlin. I'm from the United Way of Greater Rochester and the Finger Lakes. My role is the Community Engagement and Stewardship Manager, which basically is volunteerism and special events. But I'm attending just because we are a resource for others, so I want to make sure I'm in the know with all the things, even though we may not be planning a specific event ourselves.
Great, thank you. Dana?
Hey, I'm Dana St. Aubin, and kind of similar to Caitlin, so I am coordinating on behalf of Monroe County. We're having internal stakeholder meetings and also inviting external participants as well. So just kind of trying to get a feel for what things we can do to make the experience accessible, any considerations we should take into account when we're planning.
Thank you, Dana. Wesley?
Hi, I'm Wesley Wyatt. I am here along with my mom, Sue. We're both here as part of Starbridge, and we're hoping to organize and host our own accessible event during all of this.
Excellent, thank you. Glad you all are both there. Pilar?
Hi, everyone. I'm Pilar Osorio. I am the president of Grupo Cultural Latinos in Rochester, and I'm in this group committee as part of the language accessibility, specifically Spanish language accessibility, and that's going to be a part of our event, our Eclipse event, but also to offer support for other organizations and events in Spanish translations and voiceover.
Fantastic. Kristen?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Smith. I'm from the Arc of Monroe. And Anita, I'll just mention real quick, you call this the ARC. And I'm just going to give a little correction there. We're not the ARC. We haven't been in a number of years. The R actually is the R word. And so we don't use that anymore. And we are the Arc of Monroe. So all chapters across the United States have adopted, a lot of them have adopted and gotten away from the ARC. So just wanted to make that distinction. part of the Arc of Monroe, and we are looking, along with my colleague Tracy Crosby, who can't make this meeting today, just looking for opportunities to share things with the people that we support and our staff, so they have opportunities to be a part of this great day.
Excellent, thank you. Sue Wyatt.
Good afternoon. I'm Sue Wyatt. I'm from Starbridge, and I've been asked to be on a part of this committee. I was trying to arrange for an event for the individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities over at the Golisano Autism or Children's Center on East River Road, but that seems to have fallen through. And I wanted to ask anybody in this group if they're aware of anything going on at any parts of like the Al Siegel complex, maybe on the corner of South and Elmwood, because that might be another opportunity for like a wide open space that could possibly have accessible bathrooms and, you know, facilities for folks too. So I just wanted to throw that out as a question. And I could, my management at Starbridge is more than happy to support things. I mean, to a degree, we're not made of money, but we could provide certain things for that population if needed. So open to ideas. So thank you all.
Great, thanks, Sue. Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Sarah Murphy-Epamonte. I'm here representing WXXI. I'm the project manager for our Move to Include initiative, which is our station-wide initiative to promote the inclusion and accessibility of our programming, television, news, radio, community events, all of that. So I know some on our news team who are not represented here today are working on a podcast about the eclipse and the planning process. And so Dan, I will be sure to share with Veronica that those materials are available now. But yeah, we're not planning a specific event. We're just here as a support and a resource for any of the other organizations that are looking to get the word out about what they're doing, and also just the overall process of how things are going.
Super, thank you. And thank you for helping us magnify the efforts to the community, because as you know, it's part of what we're working with, is because this isn't necessarily everybody's first or second thought as their event planning, and we really want to help move them into that space on a regular basis. So thank you. Lori.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I'm Lori Marr with the Genesee Transportation Council, and I've been working on the transportation components of planning. So trying to spread the word to our government partners and to the people that own, maintain, and operate different sectors of the transportation system, between the people that do construction work and RTS and that sort of thing. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great having you along with us. The closer this gets, it really is amazing what is going to happen. So, Lori, I know that you have that sense of impending, wonderful chaos as well. Dee?
Hi, I'm Dee Mascari. I'm with Rochester Accessible Adventures. And like Anita, we are here to help with accessibility at watch parties and other eclipse events.
Excellent. And Dan?
Hi all, Dan from the Rochester Museum and Science Center, one of the core Eclipse committee members. Just working to help bring this group together, host the Zoom. We're doing everything we can locally here and trying to make this as accessible as possible for the entire region, one way or another.
Excellent. And Stacy, thank you for being here as our interpreter today. Appreciate that. So in looking back, and thank you all for introducing yourselves and giving us a little bit of an update of where you are on some of your own planning. Looking back to our last meeting and some of those notes that we had compiled, from that particular thing. I know that we were interested in a couple things, and I'll just outline those really quick. But we were wanting to make sure that the community event planners had access to information that could help their events be more inclusive, and to give that to them in a timely fashion so that they would do the advanced planning pieces for that. We were interested in ensuring that the community would know where to access accessible features and amenities and engagement in those hosted events, and looking at how we could somehow create any data resource links that were going to be put up. As we were looking at how we could help those events express what they intended to have, so that people could make a informed decision about what they were going to attend during the event. We were looking at some features such as that we might be able to do on our event end as this committee, but looking at maybe some storyboards. So using that idea of social story, where you help people understand what to anticipate when they go to an event. And so who might create those for this particular event? And I believe we mentioned that some of those types of resources might already be available. So again, looking at this, beginning to look at the weekend, the days before, the days during, as that communication piece to the community. So I think one of the questions that I had, Dan, to lead off, just because I know that you have been front and center with facing the public a lot in the past several months. And I think, Sue, you and Wesley might also have been doing, maybe some of the others participating in some of those events of community engagement. Are people asking about accessibility? Are event planners, potential hosts, starting to ask about it? If so, what kinds of questions have we been answering, or have you been hearing?
I've been getting a couple. The two main ones have been, will interpreters be available? And are materials available in multiple languages?
From Starbridge, I'm getting more about like wheelchair accessibility and interpretations for people who may be visually impaired, and how that can work. And then the other thing one of my colleagues is her big thing is like accessible bathrooms for people larger than 50 pounds. Because sometimes you have an individual who has, who's 15 or 30 or something, who still uses adult diapers and needs a place to have a changing table that can accommodate them. And that's one of the things that we're hoping to get at one of our locations. But that said, we could maybe take a different tack and have people view from home. I'm just open to ideas of what we can, share with the community on this.
Anybody else where you feel like you're fielding questions from the community about these events and what kinds of access issues people are having?
We haven't been fielding a lot of questions at the ARC of Monroe. We're actually kind of being the ones to put it in front of our leadership so they understand what's happening, because I think they had no idea the large scale of this event coming, and really have been surprised by what we've been sharing with them and what this group has done and stuff. So, being that it'll be afternoon, all of our day programs will be letting out. And so we're really concerned about having the people we support, 1,500 of them on the roads and in these buses coming home from work or their programs. And so that's the main thing we've been doing, is sharing information. And then, just like Sue mentioned, perhaps stay home and have a celebration that day. It's a whole thing with you know, revenue and stuff that we'll be losing that day, but perhaps, you know, it just makes the most sense for safety, so we don't have to worry about accessibility in bathrooms and things like that. But if we, you know, we even talked about perhaps getting them a kit that they could all have and enjoy, you know, with their we're going to get glasses for everyone so that they have all the tools to really have a fun activity while they're at home, but they're safe and there's no worries about trying to have them navigate the roads, which we know might be difficult.
Yeah, thanks for all of those thoughts. And I think one of the issues that I've heard as I've been trying to talk with more people is about that transportation piece, and event holders that are thinking, oh, well, that will be great. Of course, we'll invite people in. And one event planner said, but we don't really have parking, so they would have to be dropped off. And I'm thinking logistics. So you're gonna, in addition to people working and going back and forth between a structured day program or, you know, something that they're doing with community hab, those buses are probably going to be used. So extra buses for a 12 to 5 party somewhere. I don't know that extra buses are going to be able to navigate and get around. And I don't, and maybe we ask Lori that, but should we be less focused on getting people to parties? But I don't want to exclude either, right? Just because we have a transportation issue, I don't want to exclude people from the challenge of parking or the challenge of travel that day, because that's going to be everybody's reality. Lori, did you want to chime in?
Well, no, that's a good point. And I think, you know, we've been just telling everybody that, you know, try to think about, plan ahead, you know, think about where you might want to experience this event. If you want to be out in a rural area, then plan ahead. And if you need transportation for that, if you need, you know, whatever the situation, if you want to be alone, if you want to be with friends, but if you want to be at a party or a festival, then same thing, you know, make plans, you know, no matter what, whether or not they have children in a stroller or you use a mobility device, you know, whatever the situation, but whatever it is, you know, plan ahead. And we've been really trying to have everyone think about that. And it's a little early for some people, but I know it's the rest of us are kind of panicking because it's like it's not really too early. So it's not too early for us as organizers and you know, planners. But I know it can be a little bit early for maybe my neighbor who's, yeah, I'm gonna want to do that. So just kind of keep reminding for people to plan ahead, and also reminding that, you know, we're so lucky that the path is right in our backyard. So if people are able to just get outside or on a back deck or the back patio of the facility, you know, whatever it is coming right to our door. So again, the education that you don't have to travel anywhere. Some people don't like to travel. Some people aren't going to want to travel. Some people can't travel. But if you do think you'll need to or want to, definitely plan ahead and start booking your transportation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those will end up being, I think for some of the organizations that do service provision, those questions will be, what are we doing in our typical Monday afternoon? And what might we do different on purpose because of the strategy that's needed to get people around? Other thoughts, we'll stay for a minute on the actual event experience the day of. There's almost these two pockets of, if you are an organization that you are a service provider to people with disabilities and you're maybe going to orchestrate something, and then this other pocket of event planners out there that we want to infiltrate and infuse our inclusion efforts into, so that people could say, well, you know, my typical group's not doing anything for this, but look, that I could go over to the park that my community rec center is doing and join them. And that only really happens well if that rec center has planned inclusively. So in my mind, I'm seeing those two catch places for our activity as an accessibility committee. If we stay for a minute in direct service provider realm, are there other questions and concerns that are coming up that might need to go to the larger stakeholder group or a particular part of that?
The one thing I kind of want people to think about is how they want to let people know when to put their glasses, when to take their glasses off and when they need to get their glasses back on. And how to make sure that a lot of people, well, A, have a buffer of time, because no matter what, you should always, give yourself a few extra seconds anyhow. We do have over 3.5 minutes, depending on your location. So adding 2-3 seconds on both sides is not a terrible idea. But I know one of the big things we've been thinking about is, how do we tell that without disrupting the sight as well of the eclipse?
So, and I will just say, I plan to keep my glasses on the entire time. Am I not supposed to plan to do that? Like,
So
I can
you
take them off.
should take your glasses off during totality. In fact, we recommend you do, because that is the only safe time you can look towards the sun without needing safety equipment. It's almost like the way I love how Deb describes it is a black velvety hole in the sky.
So that's a great social story type of a video. And has that already been created? Is that out there? Is there an animated storyline graphic that says, here it comes, here it comes, here it comes, it's here, take your glasses off, that's what it's going to look like. Okay, get ready, wait for the chime or the whatever your signal's going to
Not
be.
from our perspective, not from here. There is some at the national level, but not from Rochester.
Do we want one?
Yeah,
Are y'all working on that yet?
not yet.
I think I see two main characters, Dan and Deb.
Come on, Dan, what else are you possibly doing?
If someone could create a cloning machine, I could really use one.
Right.
Well,
I'm just teasing you.
Yeah, exactly. I think what we could do, the accessibility committee, would be to review the script so that we know that it contains the type of information that and actually we could just review your script because I'm guessing you have it in there, but just making sure that before that went into production that it might have a key phrase or a something that would work well within social story type of presentation. So yeah.
On a similar note, one thing we are looking at getting done as soon as possible is, with the partial eclipse taking place 2 months from today exactly, letting people know that they must wear eclipse glasses the entire time and that sunglasses do not work. I do still get that question a fair amount.
Yes. And I just had another thought while I was taking notes on that is, boy, if you do an animated one or if you do a live character type of social story video, I'm sure amongst all of us, we could pull in some folks that have disabilities to be a part of that, to show off the viewing of the eclipse, in practice. So if we wanted to really make it an all-inclusive video, that might be a fun piece of it. Somewhere amongst us, we have time to make that happen with you, Dan. So I don't want to overlap. Like if this committee decided we would go do that and then you're already doing one, but let's just merge them into the same one if that made any sense. So I just volunteered the whole committee to help with that video. All good on that? Okay. I do love that key phrase about no sunglasses. Sunglasses do not work. That key phrase and big visual needs to go into that. Just think that this could be something that could be played ahead of time over and over within different, you know, if we're thinking of different populations where understanding what's about to happen will be important, and then how to navigate it will be important. So, and that goes for everybody that has not experienced one of these before. So, so if anything else on just that provision of, I think that pocket I was talking about provision within social or structured groups that might be working specifically with people with disabilities. Anything you want to pop up there? If not, we can come back to it.
Not locally, but something that was just sent to me today from the New York State, sent to me by the Department of Environmental Conversation from the DC Conservation. Thank you. The New York State Library System produced a collection of resources for people who are blind or have low vision. And I was literally within this meeting just connected to the chief disability officer of the governor's office, so for New York State, about getting more information or materials together.
Excellent.
That just happened to be timed perfectly.
Right. So that's Kim Hill.
It's Ben Thapa.
Okay. No, and they were asking you to provide resources for them to give out?
They're looking at starting to create their own statewide resources that they can share.
Nice. Yeah, we had some nice media this past week featuring Rochester, so it was fantastic to be put front and center a little bit more with the work. And I'd love for that narrative, Dan, as you go along, if there's any way that this committee can help with this inclusion narrative, that I think Rochester can probably take a confident position on our intention to make this inclusive in our region. I think that's a great piece of what is happening here. All right, so the other side, just to jump to it, was the idea that we're going to have a whole host of people planning and hosting events all around the greater Rochester, Western New York regions, and specifically along the band there. How do we as an accessibility committee do more to help? And I think some of that from perspective, Dan, because I know that you're in every piece of this equation. I know some on the group have been a part of the larger stakeholder meetings as well. So you see that the enormity of the hundreds of people that are involved there. The mailing list is very long. So how I know that REA has created just an event planning snapshot of principles for inclusion in event planning that really was created as a starter list. There are many resources which we list on that page for people to go very in depth on it. What we find in our consultation work is that the problem becomes the implementation. So there's lots of wonderful resources. Are people going to implement them? And if they seem hard, they're probably not. So question always comes to how else can we help? These organizations come to us, come to this committee and say, we want to help with this one thing, or we're probably missing something. Can we talk to you about it? So that's definitely something Dee and I have just put our organization out there to try to push people into those conversations. But I'd love the committee's thought now that we have another month under our belt. How else do we think that we can be working to push into this particular space?
Well, Anita, I can tell you, this is Lori at GTC. I can tell you that I did a presentation not too long ago up at Hilton Parma Recreation, and they're doing some event planning. And I made sure to have a big slide or two of the different information, and if nothing else, to plant the seed, and gave that example that I think you've used a lot, that it's okay if you have a couple handicap parking spots for your building, but perhaps this day maybe cone off extra. So I was trying to plant the seed that it's okay to provide more. Let go crazy. So I was trying to plant that seed. So I'm trying to just kind of mention that whenever I can, and encouraging people. So I think just in everyday casual conversations. Dan, have you been hearing anything from folks at the festivals? I happened to just see you in Brockport yesterday, but I know you've been out there almost every waking moment at a festival. Are you getting a sense of getting any information to or from, folks?
It's been a mix. I think people are still, Brockport being one of the bigger exceptions of like they knew they knew about the eclipse.
Oh, good.
Which surprised both Deb and I. We didn't have to talk too much up about it, but ask what people's plans are. And a lot of the conversation has been around people are wanting to stay home or take off from work. I have seen a lot of people be happy about schools being canceled, but still conversations on making sure that those kids are still well fed, especially within the city, and knowing that a lot of kids, parents might not be able to stay home that day, which is a different type of accessibility that we still want to cover. Sorry, mine's all over the place.
No, that's
I think
okay.
a lot of the big festivals just are still finding their footing. And admittedly, we are as well. Today, we just did one of our first really big walkthroughs of what our event will look like throughout the entire building. And, we had to think about where we're going to put the accessible porta potties, think about how we're going to get vehicles to drop people off, and making sure that things aren't at too steep of an angle from the street. Even possibly figuring out where fencing is going to go so that you can have buses drop people much closer off. Having seating available for people who might not be able to stand during the entire bit of totality. Just trying to think through all of those issues as we walk through. But yeah, we need to remind a lot of the larger festivals. I have a feeling a lot of the heavy work is about to be done, where a lot of people say, okay, yes, we're going to do something for 3 days, but what does that 3 days look like? Or what does the day off still look like? A lot of the reserving grounds is being done, but not as much overall. And after a couple conversations last week, it's hit me, we still have a lot more people we need to talk to. Well, that's always the case, but there's very specific sectors that I've come to realize we haven't chatted with at all.
Dan, with your within those conversations you've been having, do you know if the city's rec centers are planning something cohesively across them all?
Yes. In fact, we've been helping them out with that one. So the R centers, all of them should be open that day. We're actually working on making sure every single one of them has a telescope as well. And we're looking at holding additional training as soon as I can get maybe 1 or 2 specific days set out to just start really teaching people.
Yeah, and I wonder about the inclusive piece. If those spaces could become hubs because they're neighborhood based, and you would and they would have an interpreter at each of them. They would have some of the other pieces that we've talked about just already baked into their events, their expectation. And sometimes that is actually those accessible parking lot spots. If there's 2 usually there, then if we're intentionally inviting all of the community, maybe you have 8 or 10 blocked off so that it really does become intentional that way, and then advertised. And that could be something they could take on, not you taking that on, but the city, our center department. And if they had this much lead time, looking at that particular piece of it, and that'll be important. With you talked about, is that a place for a meal to be provided since they're not going to be in school that day, and are they planning on that as a lunch versus some that usually have a dinner, which would still be 6 o'clock and after the event. So just wondering if there's ways we can push in some of the concerns, having multilingual interpreters available at those spots. Again, just really looking at if they're going to be, that's 13, 14 places in the city that we could be very, very intentional about having narrative description. Sorry, I have a helicopter going over. Shaking the house. But those kinds of things that would really enhance those experiences and allow us then to push to children that are maybe don't typically go there after school, but that could be a great place to gather students with disabilities, that whole kind of thing. So happy to try to help with that kind of conversation with them. If you have some lead contact people that are looking at our center eclipse planning.
Yeah, we can take that conversation offline from this meeting.
I'm wondering about, so the stakeholder list is about how long, Dan? 256, 529? What's that number?
It's probably getting closer to 700. I haven't looked in a little bit. And it also, sometimes, we have people down twice from when they were part of different organizations. We got to do a little cleaning up, admittedly, but I'm sure that's not going to remove over 100 people.
That's fantastic. And I think, Sue, I saw your face. That's an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to tell the story. It's an opportunity to push in with lead time for them to do things about this. And I'm wondering what that strategy is. Obviously, if you can get our free event planning page to all of them and pseudo require them to read it. Right? We talked about the survey. In the survey, if they're going to be hosting an event, that they actually get asked questions at that moment about what features that they're going to have, accessibility features, and then listing things that actually teach them while they're taking the survey. Like,
Mhm.
oh, toning off extra spaces, having an adult changing station for a restroom. Yes, we'll have a sign language interpreter. We'll have a bilingual, which language interpreter. We'll have materials, like that stuff listed when they're signing up their event. So those were two thoughts. And then, not to make any more work for anybody, but if you have 700 people that are doing incredible things every day and very, very busy, could we create a tip of the week, a tip of the month, a tip of whatever regularity that comes off of that already curated resource list and just gets thrown in front of them one little bite at a time? In order to do what that does for us, it's very helpful to get little pieces of candy versus the whole candy store. So, and that's something, certainly, because we created the original one, Dee and I can make some tip of the week types of things. But is it possible to put that in front of everybody? And
Maybe not everybody, but a good chunk of people. And if you were to send me that, I would also start putting that on social, or at least if you tag us on social media, I can reshare it. There's different ways to get in front of a lot of people, but I can never guarantee everyone.
yeah, only the eclipse for everyone under the sun, right? That's what you are
Yes.
guaranteeing.
Anita, I would add, definitely, reach out to Deb and give her some, like an editorial calendar, so to speak, like a little list, or, some pre-developed little nuggets that you're talking about. And maybe she can include those, I'm sure she would, include those in those big email blasts that she sends out, because I know those are getting to be more frequent.
Mhm.
And she always includes lots of great content there. So I bet you if you just submitted something kind of spoon feed ready to go, that would be good.
And that's what I'm wondering, like with our partnerships in this with Visit Rochester and some of those other entities that also propel and help amplify a message of inclusion in tourism. But if we looked at a few of those strategic places that are going to be pushing this out, but also have the message of, and if you're doing this, don't forget, and here's how, and here's some creative things. So just trying to look at who those entities are to help get that message. So I think if we can get people hooked on at least one thing, like, Lori, instead of just 2 accessible parking spots, we now will have 8.
Yeah.
And then by having them think of one thing, typically they might ask, and what else could we do? Because that's parking, but what else about the experience? So I love the idea of getting somebody hooked on one piece so that they can ask more questions, and then we have resources for helping them with other pieces of it.
Yeah,
That
and
reminds
Anita,
me.
that's
Oh, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say that's something, similar to Dan's point. That's something that, a move to include can push out as well to our audience.
Excellent. Yeah, I think the more corners it's coming at people, because we don't always know where they're going to read it that day. But that really, really does help with that kind of messaging. Other ideas that are popping up around this message of there are solutions, and that's what we really want them to.
Oh, Sue has her hand up.
Sue.
Yeah, I was wondering if anybody, and I'm kind of thinking of WXXI with this, has reached out to like our refugee community, the folks, because I know that on Connections there have been some conversations with the folks that came from Afghanistan, for example, and I don't even know if they know this is happening. And maybe that's something that we could, as far as accessibility and inclusiveness, we could maybe do a reach out to that particular community, maybe in different languages, visiting different centers where they might congregate. I have no idea. I'm just grasping at straws for ideas here, but I know that WXXI has done that sort of thing in the past, so.
Yeah, I can't speak for the news team because I don't know what they have or haven't done. Anita and Dan, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought we had someone representing the refugee resettlement community when we had our in-person meeting at RMSC. So I'm not sure where that's going, but definitely I can put it across to the you know, put it out there to the greater team.
That'd be great, yeah. I know through my church I have a small connection with Triple RS. And maybe that we could get some information out their way to say, hey, this is happening. And you're in the right place at the right time, you know?
I think the community in general too, because I don't know how many people I've told about this. They're like, oh yeah, do I have to wear glasses for that? Or, you know, I just envision
Yeah.
people being ignorant and looking up.
My favorite conversation from this, well, one of my favorite conversations from this weekend was someone talking about how in 2017 they were looking up and just covering their eyes with their hands as they were looking at the partial. And then a neighbor thankfully came over with a welder mask. Yeah, only slightly horrified me, but it happens. It happens more often than not of people not knowing whether to wear glasses or not and what materials are actually safe or not.
And then people that don't know might not look at all because they don't want to take a chance.
I was at a medical office this morning, and not necessarily because they won't take a chance, they just had no idea. And I said to the doctor, I said, you know about the eclipse next April, right? And she said, no. And I said, so there's an eclipse. Think about what you're going to do with your staff. Think about your clients that are coming in right then. You all need to see it. So, and be prepared to see it and have the glasses to see it. I tried to put all that in one muddled sentence. And she was just like, okay, thanks for the heads up. I said April 8th next year. So I think there is a lot of just, I didn't know this was coming. So yeah, I think I think it can be incorporated into a lot of really unique projects. Talking about churches, well, that could be Sundays, Saturday or Sundays, community project at the place of worship to make a pinhole projector to take home for Monday. It's already a captured audience, and now they can talk about this thing that's going to happen and send everybody home with their either that or a pair of the eclipse viewers, right? But those would be the ways to just take advantage of everybody and have them be part of the solutions. Other things that are coming up, I'm going to look at our notes from the last one while you're talking.
Quick question for the group. It's sort of a vocabulary word, I guess, which everyone wants to you know, to be accurate. You know, in transportation, you know, I think we kind of still use the word handicap parking, which I've never really loved. But is it better to say accessible parking? I mean, is that a better word? I mean, I think it's better, but I always like to double check what, because I think that's a like the official sign is that in like the official manuals. So we always tend to be kind of correct based on that. And then I catch myself and I'm like, there's got to be a better word. I don't particularly like that myself. So
yeah,
committee, what do you guys recommend? Because I can try to be better about it when I'm talking non-technically.
Yeah, totally appreciate that. And language is ever evolving daily. I find people weighing in on their perceptions of certain words. I do think as a society, we've moved from handicap, moved it aside as an older term, and that got packaged with a lot of negativity along the way. And so accessible anything, accessible parking, accessible entrance, accessible fishing dock, really leads the way to the function of that space or that that particular thing. And I think that you will continue to see the old signage until they put it in their budget to renew the signage and update it to the more updated logo.
Right.
Action-oriented person in the chair, and also taking off handicap from that and just either putting parking or accessible parking there. So you can certainly do that. It does propel the movement, the shift from older terminology. So that's fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we've pretty much covered the action items that we had talked about in the last meeting, at least globally, to being able to see, I think, as a group, what's happened just in this first 30 days together. Now that we're coming at it from this lens of inclusion, what are we seeing and how are we reporting back? So because time will go very quickly between now and then, I think that it's probably very helpful for everybody on the committee, and that includes people who aren't here today. And then I'd like to expand that, as mentioned before, to all of the stakeholders, that this should just become part of the Rochester narrative around the eclipse, and not just the accessibility committee's efforts. And I think that we all agreed on that from the very beginning. And I know that was the intent of this committee forming too. I'm very appreciative of that. So if we were looking at some specific things that came up today for action items, I'm seeing the creation of a social story that touches on key words, key phrases, key steps in the process of experiencing an eclipse that we can all use, and but the big we, the stakeholder we, event planners, to promote out this eclipse that's coming up. In addition to that social story becoming created, I'm looking at getting more of these planning resources to those stakeholder event planners and letting them know that there is an accessibility committee that's happy to help. It's happy to dig deep into very specific aspects that somebody might be needing help with, whether it's literal support at their event to put somebody out in the parking lot and make sure that those spaces, if they run out of the 8 that were coned, that they have another person coming up, that traffic attendant that can help them find a spot for that guest that is more accommodating. Those kinds of things I think we can drill down with folks if they will be open to asking us. So I see that as a way to propel this out. The tip of the week idea, and I can't promise it's every 7 days, but the tip of the time, your next tip, whatever we call it, I think that might be something, because we can always link to the greater, longer package of resources, but at least giving them one item to start considering as a community, because of the community narrative. 4th item would be our centers, and seeing if there's a way that those, at least some of them, could become intentional hubs for the community to be able to know that they have certain resources there. And getting out those resources, the new ones that you have, Dan, making sure we place those somewhere where we know to get people to them.
My goal for this week is to do a lot of website updates before Thursday's meeting. have a lot of resources that people have been asking for that just need to spend a good half day working on adding.
Yeah. Excellent. So we have that big meeting on Thursday. That can we put a slide in from the accessibility committee?
Send me the information and I will get it up on there.
Okay. Accessibility committee, I may be emailing you afterwards to just get your sense of what do we want on our one slide for the big meeting. What's our messaging there? So we'll send that out. And let's see. Sue, to your question about change, or the person you talked about, their question about changing stations, availability across the community. I wonder if we could put somebody on that somewhere to figure out where we do have those literal bathrooms that are
Right.
more accommodating.
It could be that there's a couple of the accessible playgrounds in the region that might have that. That's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head, other than the medical centers.
Yeah, and Fairport has one. It's not complete universal design, but the tables do hold up to, what was that? Sorry, one more time.
350.
350 pounds, yeah.
Oh, fantastic, yeah.
So they have 2 of those units. So anything by the canal there in Fairport is a place to go.
Good to know. If we could have like a list of that would be lovely to share with our families.
Yeah, I'll Dee and
There's
I
the
will
one in
start that
Canandaigua too, but I don't know if the bathrooms are done there yet.
Yeah, I know they're working on the new
Yeah.
overhang right now. We'll start the list and we'll pass it amongst the group and see if we can compile a few more pieces to that.
Thank you.
I don't want to go too much beyond what we need to. If we feel like we've accomplished today's review and update and moving forward lists. Anything else that anyone would like us to do? Do we want to try to stay on a monthly meeting for a little bit okay. Dan, may I work with you on a date for that and getting that one set up?
Yeah, we can figure that out.
Super. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, it's great to see you. All right, we'll be in touch. Thanks so much.